This lecture will be focused on another DAP element that we covered in our DAP lecture. So specifically in this lecture, we'll be talking about how to create a caring community of learners, and specifically looking at guidance of young children. So just a little bit of review on what creating a caring community of learners is all about. So if you remember in our previous lecture, these were some of the points that were covered related to creating a caring community of learners. So one, it's important to make sure that all members of the classroom community are valued by each other and recognized for the strengths that they bring. Our job is to nurture relationships with each child and to also help to develop nurturing relationships between children. Everyone in the classroom community should be respectful to one another and accountable in their actions so that we're all behaving in ways that are conducive to learning and creating the relationships discussed in the previous bullet. The physical environment should be safe and protect the health and well-being of all of the community members. And then we should also, in addition to feeling physically safe, also feel psychologically safe, so that we should feel cared for, we should feel comfortable, we should feel supported in our endeavors so that we can focus on learning and growing rather than on being worried about our physical or psychological safety. There are three main reasons that a caring community of learners is important, and these are listed in your textbook. So first, when children experience a caring community of learners, they are more likely to develop positive social skills and have better emotional self-regulation. And this is vital to develop in the first 5 to 8 years of life. This is a sensitive period for that aspect of growth and development. So when children have the opportunity to develop these skills during early childhood and early elementary school, they're likely to be better set up in their future development. So that's the second bullet. We're building the foundation. So when we're helping children to develop positive social skills and emotional self-regulation in early childhood, we're building a foundation of learning for later success in school and in life. And one of the critical components to building this foundation is close relationships with teachers and peers. So another reason that it's important for children to have a caring community of learners is that we can prevent future social and behavioral difficulties. So if children develop these skills early, they're more likely to do well later on, and they're less likely to do more poorly in terms of social and behavioral challenges and with regard to school. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about all three of these bullets and how we can assure that children are getting these three important outcomes. So this slide talks about the social and emotional skills that children need to be building during those early years, particularly between the ages of 5 to 8. So you can look on the graphic to the right of the slide, and that will give you some additional things, but we'll focus on the text to the left. So one, children need to have a good sense of self. They need to describe themselves positively. They need to feel capable and confident. They need to be feeling like they're able to do the things that they want to do. So if they wanted to draw a particular picture, feel confident that they have the skills needed to do so, and feel good about the things that they try and the things that they achieve. So we want children to have a good self-concept, a good description of self, and we also want them to have good self-esteem, positive feelings attached to their abilities and efforts. We also want children to have good emotional literacy. So emotional literacy consists of multiple things, but we're going to focus on just three here. So the three things we're going to focus on is that as part of emotional literacy, children need to be able to decode emotions and respond appropriately to others. So they should be able to look at another person and decipher what emotions they're feeling and then respond in an appropriate way. So if they see someone crying, go over and give them a pat on the back, understand that they're sad, understand that they're needing something, and then respond in a way that's likely to help that other person feel better. We want children to be good at empathy and perspective taking. So empathy is when you not just feel bad that someone feels bad, but you also kind of feel what they're feeling. So you really feel their joy, you feel their sadness, you feel their anger. Not that you are personally angry, but you feel what it feels like to have those feelings. And you can take their perspective and you can say, oh, I can put myself in that other person's shoes and realize how hard that must be, or how happy that must make them. So part of emotion decoding and responsivity is predicated on the ability to be empathetic and take the perspective of others. So another thing we want to help children to develop is the ability to manage their own feelings and emotions, to have effortful control. So eventually, not right away, we hope that when children are angry, they won't throw themselves on the floor and have a temper tantrum, or that they won't cry loudly and extensively, that maybe they'll have more minimal tears if they're sad. Or that if they're joyful, they won't be running around and knocking everything over in their excitement. But that takes a little while to build. It takes a long time for children to get the hang of managing the big emotions that they have and being able to restrain them in a socially appropriate way, not put them away and not feel them or not experience them or not express them, but express them in ways that are considered to be socially acceptable. And then going along with all of this, if we want children to be able to navigate social situations, they need to have more than just feeling good about themselves and having emotional literacy. They need to know some things that they can do in social situations. So how do we navigate conflict? What do you say when somebody's upset? What do you say when you have a disagreement over something? How do you navigate who's going to get to play with the toy first? What does sharing look like? What does turn taking look like? What does it mean to cooperate with someone else? And what does that look like in real time? How can we be helpful to others? What kinds of behaviors and activities would truly be helpful to someone else? So in addition to teaching these, personal skills, we also need to make sure that children have actual tangible strategies that they can use when they are navigating social interactions with others. So on the next two slides, we're going to talk about how to build relationships. So I had said on a couple slides ago that one of the critical components to getting positive outcomes out of being in a caring community of learners is that you need to have good relationships with adults and with other children. So let's talk about how to build relationships with adults first. So this is related to attachment. So I don't know if you've studied attachment in other classes, but attachment is a significant bond with another adult person or another human. Typically it's a parent or a family caregiver, and this relationship gets built early in life, in infancy, and then carries forward throughout time after that. So in addition to developing these kinds of relationships with family caregivers, children can also develop solid attachment relationships with non-familial caregivers. So a child care teacher is another person that a child develops this kind of relationship with. And these relationships are critical. There's tons of data to show how important it is for children to have these attachment relationships. So a couple things related to this. One is there is research to show that when classroom tone is calm and friendly and nurturing, like a place, like when you go into the classroom, it feels like a good place to be. People's voices are not angry. There's a hum going on, there's busyness, there's talking, but it's pleasant, it's interactional. It just has a good feeling to it. And we know that when children are in classrooms that have this good emotional tone, that the classrooms are better quality, and that it's more likely that children will develop a secure bond with the caregivers who are supporting them. Another thing that we know is that when children have good attachment relationships to significant others in their lives, particularly family members and teachers, they can use these solid relationships to carry forward and help them to understand what other relationships should look like. So that's called internal working model, where you build an internal model of what a relationship looks like because you're basing it on good, healthy adult-child relationships that you've experienced. And then you can use that internal working model to create good, healthy relationships with peers and with romantic partners later on down the line. So there's two primary ways, well, in addition to classroom tone, there's a couple ways that you can directly help to build these kinds of caregiver-child relationships. So one is to be attuned. And so being attuned means that you are understanding what children are thinking and feeling. You're really in tune with them. You're really in sync with them. You are good at reading the child and understanding what it is they're thinking and feeling and wanting. And so when we have great attunement with young children, that's the kind of relationship that is solid and creates a really healthy, strong bond. Another thing that's helpful is when we engage in what's called serve and return interactions. So I would encourage you to take a look at the video on this slide, the 5 steps for brain building serve and return. It gives you specific ideas of how to do serve and return. But basically the idea here is if a child wants to interact with us, if they have something they want to say, it's our job to respond back and be a conversational partner. So not dropping the ball on our end. A child is trying to communicate with us and then we either cut them off or we shut them down or we just ignore the efforts that they're making. It really should be a back and forth, and when children know that they have our attention in that way, that's another opportunity to build those strong bonds or those securely attached relationships between adults and children. Some other strategies related to building relationships with adults are to bank time, so to lean into children. So there's a lot of information these days on not doing time out, doing time in, because we know that when children are struggling and you send them to navigate that kind of situation by themselves, you're telling them that they can't depend on others to help them to regulate and to help them to navigate hard feelings that they're having. So better to spend a lot of time with children, particularly when they're having a hard time, hold them close, talk to them, really lean into whatever struggle is happening. And when you have that kind of time with children, and particularly when you spend a lot of time playing and having fun when children are not having a hard time, then they're more likely to be able to rely on you better when they are having a hard time. Also not to hold grudges. So children do things. We're going to talk more later in this lecture about children's mistaken behaviors and challenging behaviors. And sometimes children do engage in behaviors that are difficult and can be kind of stressful for the adult caregiver. But if you walk around holding grudges after the event is over, it's going to make it hard for you to bank time and lean into that child. And then their behavior is likely to escalate over time because your grudge is telling them that they are a bad child who does bad things rather than a good child that you want to spend time with. So as much as you can, let things go once it's over and done with. Part of that involves regulating yourself. So recognizing that sometimes children's behaviors are stressful for you and they might be a trigger for you and they may get you feeling a little worked up, and that you need to get your own self under control, because when you regulate, then children are more likely to regulate. It's called co-regulation, where we regulate together. And as adults, we're kind of the lead in that relationship. We can't expect children to regulate to us. It's our job to regulate for them and to be the one leading that relationship. And then kind of going back to something that we were talking about with attunement, it's called being mind-minded. So you can see here that the definition is, it refers to a caregiver's tendency to view the child as an individual with a mind, rather than merely an entity with needs that must be satisfied. Mind-mindedness involves adopting the intentional stance toward another person. So basically what this means is recognizing that children have their own ideas, their own thinking, their own notions of what is important. And the more that we understand who that child is and what's important to them and how they work and how they think, the better able we are to be attuned to them. So remember on the previous slide that one of the things that was helpful to do was to be attuned. And mind-mindedness is a strategy that helps us to be attuned and to really lean into children and meet the child where they're at rather than where you want them to be at. So the other half of the relationship coin is our responsibility to help children create good relationships with each other. So the best way to do this is to provide lots and lots of time for play. When you have children sitting in circle time or at tables doing worksheets and they don't have the opportunity to interact with each other, then you're not giving them the chance to develop relationships with each other either. So the more opportunity you have for constructive play, with you there to facilitate and supervise rather than to direct, the more chances children are going to have to build those good solid relationships with their peers. So there are lots of developments of having peer relationships. So just like relationships with adults are important, it's also important for children to have relationships with their peers. I would encourage you to look at this little video called Brains at Play. It gives you just a little snippet of why play is so important and why relationships with others are so important to development. But just also to add on, we do know from research that peer relationships can lead to things like friendship. And peer relationships are slightly different than friendship. Peer relationships are having relationships with your peers. They may or may not be your friends. They may just be other children in the classroom. But we want to really help children to go one step beyond just being able to relate to and interact with other children in the room. We also want them to start developing friends. Because first children develop relationships with adults. That helps them to understand how to build relationships, which segues over to relationships with peers and friendships. And then friendships really become a building block for later intimate relationships. So these are just stages in the practice that children need to be able to have healthy relationships with others once they get to adulthood. So here are some strategies that we can use to help children build relationships with peers. So one I already mentioned, so providing lots of opportunity for children to play, particularly play that's initiated by the children themselves, not play that's directed and dictated by you yourself. Another thing is to sit down with children, so act as a facilitator, provide objects to play with, provide time to play, and then sit down with children while they're playing and help them to navigate any conflicts or challenges, encourage them to include others in their play, include them to talk with others, to build with others. So we are the cruise directors. We are the ones who come and sort of gather up all the stuff, gather up people in the same room, and then help everybody to have a good time and interact with each other. Another thing that's really important is to make sure we're always on the lookout for somebody who's not feeling that sense of belongingness, who's not being included, and make sure that they are being included. So look for children who are on the fringes, who haven't found an activity or somebody to play with. Remind children when they're being exclusionary that that's not okay in our classrooms. So if they say things that are unfriendly or mean, directly call that out. Remember when we were talking about anti-bias education? Also, if you do see children playing, I think I had already mentioned that we can be Vivian, Goose, and Paley, and we can tell children you can't say you can't play, so that everyone feels like a member of the classroom. That's a big part of what a caring community of learners is everybody belongs there, and everyone has the same access as everyone else. And if we see children being denied access in any way, it's our job to make sure that that's not happening. So part of our job is to also navigate challenging behaviors. So as much as I would like to tell you that everything will always be a wonderful, positive, emotional tone, and everyone will love each other, and everyone will play with all the toys in the way that they were meant to be played with, and there won't ever be any conflict or unhappiness in the room, that is not true. All humans engage in these kinds of behaviors, and children are young and they are learning, and they don't have control over all their emotions yet, and they feel things much more strongly and grandly than we do as adults. So this is just part of the landscape, and it's very important to understand how to navigate those challenging behaviors when they occur, so that the classroom functions in a way that is helpful for all, but also so that each individual child gets the growing opportunities that they deserve, so that they can be healthy, functioning adults later on down the line. So in the upcoming slides, we're going to be talking about all kinds of things related to guidance and interactions. So as I briefly mentioned on the previous slide, but I really want to emphasize here that it is important to understand that challenging or mistaken behavior, so we're going to be talking on the next slide about what mistaken behavior is, and we'll talk later on about what more challenging behaviors might be. But that challenging and mistaken behaviors are developmentally normal and serve a function for the child. So children don't misbehave just to be misbehaving. They are not trying to upset you. They are not trying to manipulate you. They are trying to tell you something. And young children don't have a lot of means to explain what they're feeling and thinking. So sometimes they engage in behaviors that may seem odd or at issue for us, but they really are just trying to tell you something with the developmental skills that they have. So let's talk first about mistaken versus misbehavior, and then on the next slide we'll talk about the function of children's mistaken behaviors, what they're trying to tell us through these behaviors they're displaying. So I really hope that after this class that you will not use the word misbehavior anymore, that you will instead change over to using the word mistaken behavior, and here's why. So misbehavior, that word, implies or suggests that children are doing something purposely naughty, that they are trying to do something to annoy us, to manipulate us, that it's purposeful, that there's sort of negative intent behind it. And then, of course, if children are doing something purposeful and willful and deliberately naughty, then we must punish them. And we must label them as being bad children or being naughty children, not being a good child. So I hope that you can see that we don't want to do this, right? That we don't want to think that children are bad children, that they're purposely doing things. Again, they're small, they're young, they don't know quite how the world works yet. They have very big emotions that their brain isn't equipped yet to control. That will come much later when they're adults. So in the meantime, we need to figure out how to think about children's behaviors differently. So that's where we come with mistaken behavior. So mistaken behavior recognizes that children are developing and they're growing and they're learning, and they either have new skills or insufficient skills to always make a choice about how to fix things that are bothering them, or tell people things that they need or that they desire. So what this suggests, if children are young and immature, it suggests that children need assistance, that they need support as they grow and navigate this developmental phase of their lives. So hopefully we'll kind of segue over to thinking about mistaken behavior rather than misbehavior. So as I was saying, mistaken behaviors are a message to us. It is a child trying to tell us something about themselves and the world that they live in. So let's first talk about the graphic to the right. So I love these little iceberg graphics. They have them for all kinds of things, but this one is the behavioral iceberg. So thinking about the misbehaviors we see or the mistaken behaviors that we see versus what's really going on. So things that you might see that you find to be challenging or in that mistaken behavior realm might be fighting, complaining, stealing, yelling, meltdowns, tantrums, backtalk, resistance, ignoring, disrespect, hitting, and kicking. But here's what that child might be trying to tell you instead. This might be what's really going on. You're just seeing that surface behavior, but the reason behind that behavior could be stress, changes, transitions, boredom, confusion, feeling a lack of control, having anxiety or fears or worries, feeling emotionally dysregulated, feeling isolated or lonely or overwhelmed or uncertain, having skills that are behind that of other children in your classroom, having a temperament that makes it more difficult for you to kind of navigate daily realities and life challenges, having unmet separate sensory needs, or feeling disconnected. So I would really encourage you, instead of asking a child, like, what is wrong with you? Why are you misbehaving? Why are you backtalking all the time? Why are you so disrespectful? Instead, ask, oh gosh, what's really going on? Like, what's happening to you? What do you need? What can I help you with, right? If you can reframe your thinking to what is happening to you, what's really going on, what is underlying this behavior, why are you engaging in this particular mistaken behavior, you will be much more kind and developmentally appropriate to and with children. There's a gentleman named Dan Gartrell. You can look up more about him on this slide if you click on the link down at the bottom, but he has a great way of thinking about what might be motivating children's mistaken behavior. So kind of going a little bit farther than the iceberg on the previous slide, but really thinking about why children would potentially engage in mistaken behaviors. So one idea is that children are just young and they just don't know how the world works. So they're trying things out. They're trying strategies out for how to get food to their mouths. They're trying strategies out for how to build blocks. They're trying strategies out for how to ask for what they need or to get a toy back from a peer. And so sometimes they make mistakes as they're experimenting, and they choose behaviors that aren't particularly functional or aren't very societally accepted. And it's just because they're little. They're encountering situations and strategies for the first time, and they're just experimenting. They're trying to figure out how the world works. So sometimes another reason why children might be engaging in mistaken behavior is that they really are trying to please people. They're feeling socially disconnected, and so they're trying to either get someone's attention or they're trying to get in the group. They're trying to play with someone else who doesn't want to play with them, and they might not be using the most effective strategies. So, constantly poking at someone when they're talking on the phone because they want attention, but they're not sure how to ask for it. Those kinds of things. And then sometimes kids have just had really hard things happen in life. Maybe they have been abused or are victims of trauma or have been through a really hard time, and they're engaging in mistaken behaviors because they have these really strong needs and strong feelings that they don't know what to do with, and they don't know how to manage. So they are using kind of every behavior in their repertoire to kind of fix whatever is feeling broken inside. So very helpful in thinking about sort of why children are misbehaving, and then once we can determine what level of mistaken behavior we're seeing, then we can identify specific strategies that might be useful in countering the mistaken behaviors that we're trying to help children navigate. So in the upcoming slides, we're going to talk about something called positive child guidance. So when children are engaging in mistaken behaviors, we want to use positive child guidance in response, not to implement punishment on children. And so on the upcoming slides, we're going to talk more about what positive child guidance and punishment are, and then how to implement positive child guidance appropriately. So positive child guidance is what adults do and say, both directly and indirectly, to influence children's behavior with the goal of helping them become well-adjusted, self-directed, productive adults. So let's break this down a little bit. So one, it's everything that adults do and say. So it's everything from how I set the classroom up, what kinds of activities I put out, how much time I give for play, to directly sitting down and talking with children, being kind to them, having a positive tone when I speak to them, the kinds of things that I say or don't say. So everything that I'm doing both directly and indirectly. And my goal is not to punish children, not to make them feel bad, not to get them back for doing wrong, not to let them know how naughty they've been, but it's to help them to grow and to learn. Because again, if I believe that they're little and I believe that they don't know everything about the world yet, and I believe that they have big emotions that they can't always control, then really I'm going to come in and try and figure out how I can be a support system to them and to help them learn. Because the ultimate goal of rearing children, whether you are a child care provider or a family member, is to help children to become productive, self-directed adults who can navigate challenges without having to have someone do it for them. Like, we should always have support even when we're grown-ups, but we should be able to function fairly well independently, unlike when we're children. So we are providing that scaffolding or those building blocks for children, not just with how to read or write or do math, but also how to interact with others and to feel comfortable within themselves. And that's the goal of positive child guidance. So what we don't want to do is punish children. So if we believe that children are doing things purposefully and they're trying to annoy us and they're trying to manipulate us and they're just naughty children, and we're not recognizing that they're young and developmentally immature, we're going to feel like they need to have some sort of punishment to make sure that they know that they were naughty and that they did something bad. So really we're kind of paying them back for doing something wrong or engaging in a mistaken behavior. And sometimes we're even trying to physically hurt children or to humiliate them so that they don't want to do those things again. Unfortunately, that kind of strategy does not account for where children are at developmentally and that they're young. It just makes them feel bad about themselves. And it also doesn't help to teach them what they need to do differently behaviorally. So if a child hits another child, my goal isn't to make them bad for hitting the other child. My goal is to help them learn strategies that are more effective in getting what you want. Asking somebody for something, recognizing how hitting makes somebody else feel. Those are all the kinds of things that I can teach. But if I'm busy punishing them and paying them back and just taking them away and not letting them play anymore, then I really haven't taught them anything at all. And that's not what we're trying to accomplish, which is why we need to use positive child guidance and not punishment. So before we talk about some specific strategies that are included in positive child guidance, let's just briefly talk about why children might not use, why adults might not use positive child guidance and why they might be inclined to use punishment instead. So a big one is not knowing about child development, not understanding children, not understanding their development, their brain development, their cognitive development, their social development, and what children are able and not able to do at different ages and stages in their life. When you understand children's development and you understand their developmental limitations, it is much easier to choose strategies when you're interacting with them that are appropriate and match their developmental needs and strengths and abilities. Another part is that sometimes when we are faced with challenging behaviors or mistaken behaviors, it stresses us out. So maybe a child does something that's a trigger for you. I don't like when kids roll their eyes at each other, and I recognize that that's sort of developmentally normal when kids are in elementary school, but it bugs me. And then I feel stressed out and I feel frustrated, and I might not choose the best interaction or positive child guidance strategies because I'm annoyed and irritated. So I have to kind of take a step back and realize that my own past life experience of being bullied and my own personal values and beliefs about being kind and not, having facial expressions that are mean to other people are coming into play here, and that I'm getting a little triggered, and that it's my issue, that I'm having an issue with this that's sort of above and beyond maybe what I need to be feeling about this particular situation. And then that's creating stress and frustration, leading me to maybe not make the best choices about what strategies I might want to use. So we have to recognize kind of our own biases, our own triggers, our own past life experiences, and see how those kind of all fit together to, potentially be creating a situation where we're not able to effectively analyze and respond to some of the mistaken behaviors that children might exhibit. So now let's get into strategies that teachers can use if they are employing positive child guidance. So we're going to be talking about indirect strategies, and we're going to be talking about direct strategies. So direct strategies are the things that you actually do and say when you're directly with children. So when you're interacting with them, what are you doing and what are you saying to help navigate mistaken behaviors? Versus indirect strategies, where you're kind of working behind the scenes. How are you setting up the schedule? How are you setting up the classroom? What kinds of activities are you choosing? So indirect is stuff that you're doing potentially before the children ever even get there, while direct is when you're actually sitting down and interacting with the children. But we'll dig into both of these things more on the next slides. So as I said, direct guidance are the things that we're doing when we're actually interacting with young children. And there are three kind of main groups of direct guidance strategies. So we're going to talk about things that we can do physically when we're interacting with children, things that we might do verbally, and things that we might do in the affective or feelings realm that can influence children's behavior or give us strategies that we can use when helping them to navigate some of the mistaken behaviors that they might be displaying. Again, with an effort to help them to grow and learn and to develop strategies that they can use on their own later on down the line. So physical guidance is when we use body touch or body movement to help children to recognize and revise any mistaken behaviors they might be using. So one, we can use modeling, where we're physically doing things and children are watching us physically do things, and then hopefully they're likely to do the same thing as us. That's kind of Bandura's observational learning that we talked about in a previous lecture. We can use gestures where, we wave our hands in the air, we put up a hand to indicate stop, we wave our hands to indicate come towards me, all those kinds of physical gestures that we can use to help children know what it is that they should be doing rather than the mistaken behavior that they're exhibiting. I can give cues to children that they need to stop doing something by my body language. So maybe if I shake my head no, or I have a serious face, or maybe if I'm smiling to indicate, yay, I like what you're doing, keep on doing that. Sometimes we do have to utilize a little bit of restraint. So particularly with very young children, I might have to move them in another direction or pick them up to take them away from something. I may have to kind of gently put my arm around an older child and encourage them to move a different way. So, physical guidance most of the time involves just me doing something physically and then children watching that, but it can also include gentle physical touch that I'm using to either discourage or encourage particular behaviors. So with verbal guidance, this is when I'm saying things to influence a child's behavior. So helping to either stop mistaken behaviors or encourage positive behaviors that children are exhibiting. So one, I want to get down low, like not stand up above children and tower over them and talk above their heads. I want to phrase things positively. So that is the graphic to the left. So instead of saying the more negative of don't run, don't jump, don't yell, don't hit, I can use positive phraseology. So please walk, please go down slowly, please use a quiet voice, please be gentle. So telling children what I want them to do rather than what I don't want them to do. So speaking authoritatively or assertively. So again, remember, we don't want to be aggressive and we don't want to be passive. We want to be assertive. We want to be polite and respectful and kind and not sound like we're angry or not say anything at all and indicate that we don't care what you're doing, but having good limits, but said in a warm, comforting tone of voice. Provide children with choices. Would you like to do this or would you like to do this? So that children feel like they have some control in the situation, and you're giving them the opportunity to build the skill of thinking for themselves about what behavior might work best in a particular situation. And then also to provide logical reasons for any requests that you're making. So always think about, like, is this really something that children need to be doing? Or is this, again, just something that's bothering me and something I want a child to do versus something that they need to do or it's important to do? So really kind of dig in and think about, like, why you're asking kids to do the things you're doing and does it make sense? So finally, in the direct guidance package, let's talk a little bit about using effective direct strategies or feeling-related strategies. So this is where you're using emotion to help children to think about what they could and should be doing instead of the mistaken behavior. So one is just to give children very specific, honest feedback. When you shared the toy with so-and-so, it made them feel really happy. I could tell because they had a big smile on their face. That must make you feel good too. When you hit your friend and took their toy, it made them feel sad. They were crying. What's something that we could do instead? So that's what this praise makeover piece is. Instead of saying great job, giving more specific, honest feedback. So I like the way you kept trying even when the problem became harder. Give children lots of positive attention. That's that piece I talked about before with building relationships and leaning in and having attunement and banking time and making children feel special and connected to you. Talk a lot about feelings, how you're feeling, how they're feeling, how other people are feeling. Point out feelings expressions, have feelings charts and books in the classroom. The more children understand about emotion, the more emotion literacy they will have, and the better they will be at building relationships with other people and maintaining them. Don't give children things unless you have to. So if a child does something you like, you really don't need to give them stuff. They don't need to have prizes. They just need to feel good. And that's where that specific, honest feedback comes in. If children hear about things they did well or things that they need to work on, they will learn how to internally reward themselves and internally redirect or correct themselves without you having to give them stuff. There is literature to show, research to show, that when we give children stuff to make them behave, that actually doesn't really work, and it doesn't make children behave better over the long term. Giving children positive feedback and helping to build intrinsic motivation is a better motivator than giving children rewards or extrinsic motivators. And then again, with that serve and return, when children are speaking, listen to them, show that you're paying attention. This makes children feel valued and heard, which is one of the building blocks of relationships. As I mentioned on a previous slide, indirect guidance is the things that you're typically doing behind the scenes. So rather than what I'm doing in my direct interactions with children, these would be things that I'm setting up either before children arrive or after they leave. It could be sometimes while they're there, but usually these are things that are done when the children are not present to guide them in choosing behaviors that are adaptive rather than choosing behaviors that are less adaptive. So I am trying to minimize challenging behaviors and promote positive behaviors through indirect strategies. So we're going to talk about adult-child ratios, group size, scheduling, transitions, and space organization. Adult-child ratios is a pretty easy one. It just basically means that I want to make sure that there are enough adults per child if an adult is overwhelmed and has too many children to be responsible for in a space, it makes it difficult to do this kind of planning and to interact effectively with the children, to implement those kinds of direct guidance that we were talking about, because then adults feel overwhelmed and dysregulated, and there's just too many children to create relationships with and to pay attention to. So having the right number of adults per child is very important. So the next one that's also fairly easy to talk about is group size. So this is thinking about how many children are in the classroom, not how many teachers per child, but how many children are in the classroom. So when we are talking about younger children, we typically have a smaller group size, and as kids get older, we can have larger group sizes. But the more children you have, the more teachers you need, and the more difficult it is to navigate. So a smaller group size can always be helpful, and there is evidence to show that when children are in classrooms that have a fewer number of children, that their developmental outcomes improve and that quality increases and teachers are better able to create effective relationships. Another important element of indirect guidance is thinking about the schedule for the day. So we want to make sure that we are planning schedules that allow children flexibility but predictability. So there's an article on Canvas that you can look at to learn more about this, but essentially it's a schedule that is fairly set, that children generally know what's going to be happening on and off throughout the day, but is not so rigid that can't be changed if need be. So if children are enjoying their playtime, extending it and pushing lunch a little bit later. So again, children don't know what time it is, so it doesn't really matter if something happens at a particular time. It more matters that things happen in a particular order and are fairly consistent day to day, but also, again, flexible enough to account for children's needs. A couple things to consider is, one, making sure that there's plenty of time built in for when children are arriving in the morning and leaving. Thinking about a schedule that allows children to kind of seamlessly enter the classroom. So, perhaps having a playtime at the beginning and the end, so that if children are arriving at different times or leaving at different times, they're not having to come and go during something more structured that you're doing, that everyone is participating in at the same time. And then also thinking about how to balance quieter activities versus noisy. So having times where it's a little bit more quiet, times where it's a little bit more noisy, kind of moving back and forth between those. Children don't like to be too quiet and directed by adults for too long. So, thinking about how to make the schedule kind of variable so that children aren't just sitting for a long, long time listening to teachers, that they have more time to move around and be free, and then maybe sit and be quiet for a teeny little bit, and then go back to being busy and moving around a lot. I would highly recommend that with young children, you keep transitions to a minimum and you plan for them. So try not to be moving children around a whole bunch. It's not easy to move children from place to place, and the less often you do that, the better. So one trick is to just have long play times. Children need a long time to get down deep into their play anyway. So the longer you allow for play, there's research to show that at least 60 minutes of playtime at once is a good idea. And then if you're having long extended play times where children can get deeply involved, then it's just fewer times that you have to move them from place to place. But if you are moving them, I would encourage you to get a book or look online for tips. Like this Transition Magician, it gives you some ideas for how to get children effectively moved and segued from one activity to another. But so reduce and plan. So don't have very many transitions, and think about how to plan effectively for the ones that you do have. The final piece that we'll talk about with indirect guidance is how to organize space. So how you organize the space gives clues to children about how you want them to behave and is very helpful in reducing mistaken behavior. So if you do these indirect guidance things well, you will have to spend less time directly telling children not to engage in mistaken behavior and more time just enjoying hanging out with them and playing with them. So some things you can do to have your space organized in a way that gives children clues about what behavior you would like to see happen are these things. So make sure that the play spaces are organized, that they're attractively displayed. So you can see these pictures here, that everything, that old grandma saying, so everything has a place, everything has a place and everything is in the place that it's supposed to be in. So think about how you want to structure things and make sure that things get put back the way they're supposed to. If you have labels for things, so you can see that there are picture labels, word labels, there's shape labels, so various ways that children know what's supposed to go where. That gives them clues for how to put things away and for what kind of play is supposed to happen in a particular area. You can see the picture on the left. It's kind of clear that we're doing something with the green things in the middle. We've got some scissors, we've got some dough. So, if I came over to that space, I would understand that there's supposed to be 4 children here. There's 4 spaces, 4 little bowls with dough in them. I can use my scissors to cut either the dough or the green in the middle. Maybe I want to press the green into the Play-Doh, but it gives some ideas. It doesn't tell children exactly what to do and dictate their play, but it gives them some ideas for what is happening at this particular activity area. We also want to make sure that children have quiet space, private space, soft space, comfortable space, calming space. So we don't want everything in the room to be loud and noisy. We want there to be places where children can build without interruption, where they can do dramatic play, but that they can also sit and read a book and be quiet or allow themselves to get away from the hustle and the bustle of the rest of the classroom. So always thinking very carefully about how those classroom spaces are organized. Now, despite our best efforts to use direct and indirect guidance to help navigate children's mistaken behaviors, and we said before that all children engage in mistaken behavior. It's developmentally normal. They're learning and they're growing. But sometimes children might not engage in mistaken behaviors in the way that we would expect for their age. Maybe their behaviors are more challenging than we would expect, or they last longer, or they're more persistent, or their behaviors that don't seem to be responding to our direct and indirect guidance strategies. If we have children that are exhibiting more challenging kinds of behaviors that are more persistent and are resistant to the kinds of positive guidance strategies that we're using, we may need to do more. We may need to observe, we may need to collect data and analyze it, and then create more specific interventions for those children. So on the remaining slides of this lecture, we're going to be talking about how to navigate these more challenging mistaken behaviors that may be more persistent and resistant to our positive guidance strategies. So even though all children do exhibit mistaken behavior, not all children exhibit like what we would consider to be really challenging behavior, or something that is more significant and more pervasive. So there are some estimates that preschool age children, about 10 to 30% of them are exhibiting behaviors that are more challenging. These can be kind of mild to moderate levels of challenging behaviors. And this is in typically developing children, so we're not talking about necessarily children with special needs, but we do know that, around 10 to 30% of kids exhibit behaviors that are a little beyond what we would expect even for that age group. And kind of more importantly, we know that those kids who exhibit those more challenging behaviors when they're infants and toddlers are the same children who are likely to exhibit more challenging behaviors once they get into preschool and into the school years. So there is recognition that all children exhibit mistaken behavior. A certain percent of children engage in behaviors that are even more challenging than that. And for those kids who exhibit those more challenging behaviors, they are likely to continue to exhibit those challenging behaviors down the line unless we intervene and do something to help them. So this is not an exhaustive list, so it means that I did not put every single challenging behavior that a child could be exhibiting on this page, but it is some of the behaviors that are considered to be more challenging. So remember, these are things that children are doing that are either atypical, that they're doing that other children may not be doing, but really more importantly, it's how often and how persistent these behaviors are. So almost all children engage in physical aggression, but usually it's kind of isolated incidents or it's every now and then. For it to rise to the level of challenging behavior, and I'm putting that in quotes, kind of air quotes, it would have to be like every day, multiple times a day, lasting for several weeks or even months. So again, if you look at this list, you might say to yourself, oh, that kind of just sounds like things that preschoolers do. But again, remember, these would be more often and for longer periods of time than we would expect, even for sort of typical mistaken behavior in this age group. So the video on this slide is meant to help you to understand why children might be engaging in challenging behavior. So I would encourage you to watch it so that you have a better understanding for why that more select group of children might be engaging in mistaken behaviors that sort of rise to the level of challenging behavior that are either different or more pervasive or happen more often than children who are not exhibiting these kinds of more challenging behaviors. If we have a situation where children are exhibiting challenging behaviors that are above and beyond that which we expect to typically see with regard to mistaken behavior, as I said on the previous slide, we'll need to, well, not the previous slide, but one of the previous slides, we'll need to do some sort of more directive intervention. So in that scenario, we will want to employ functional behavioral assessment. So as you can see on the graphic on this slide, that consists of 4 companion behaviors. So 1, before I can get to creating an intervention for our child, I need to identify what the problematic behavior is. Then I need to gather information. So typically that's done through observation. Then I need to analyze the data that I collect from the observation. And then finally, I need to consider what the function of the behavior that I have identified and gathered information about is, so that using that data, using that determination of function, that will help me to create an appropriate intervention or some sort of strategy to reduce the behavior that the child is exhibiting. So on the next coming slides, we're going to talk about how we can gather information and a little bit more on how we can identify the function of behavior. We're not really going to delve into points 1 or 3 of this functional behavior assessment approach because they're a bit more self-explanatory. So let's talk about how we can gather information. So typically with young children, we don't sit them down for any kind of paper pencil assessment. We would do a more contextual, observational assessment of children, so watch them in real time in the context within which the behavior is happening. And a lot of times what we're doing when we're engaging in that observation time is we're looking for 3 things, and it's called ABC. So first we're looking to see what triggers the behavior or triggers the challenging behavior that we're looking at. So what is the antecedent, or the thing that comes before, or the thing that triggers or sets the behavior off? Then we're going to look and see what the behavior is, and then we're going to look and see what the consequence is. So let's say that you have a child who doesn't like having other children come close to him or her, and that child so the antecedent would be another child gets too close. That would be the thing that triggers it. When the child gets too close, then the child in question hits or screams. That would be the behavior. And then the consequence is either something like the other child fights back, the other child cries and walks away. So if you don't want somebody to be close to you, and you get triggered when they do come close, and then you scream or hit them and they cry and walk away, your behavior is having a function and it is getting you what you want. You don't want them to be close to you, and it's not the greatest way to navigate that situation, but it gets you a result. So if the child gets a result that's in line with what their need is, they're likely to repeat that behavior again. If the child still keeps touching them and staying close, then they might try and find another way to make that child move back because they're not getting the consequence that was desired or was needed for their desire to have more space. So it's really important to look at the ABC, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence, because that's going to give you the information that you need to be able to move to the intervention phase. So part of collecting data about the consequence, or the C of the ABC approach, is to really start digging into what is the function of the challenging behavior, because oftentimes the consequence and then the child's next reaction after that consequence gives you a better sense for why they're doing the things that they're doing. So we talked about this before when we talked about Gartrell's levels of mistaken behavior, and when we talked about the behavior iceberg. Those were designed to help you to think about what the functions of challenging behaviors might be. But I just wanted to throw in that there can be other reasons why children are engaging in challenging behaviors as well. So this is just another version of what the function of a challenging behavior might be. So it may be that the child is having sensory overload, they're having too much sensory stimulation or not enough. They may be trying to get out of a situation or some sort of task that they don't like. And that's normal. We all don't like things and we all avoid them. That's the whole root of procrastination and why we wait till the last minute to do things that are more difficult or boring or challenging. So we often employ escape avoidance in our own adult lives. Sometimes we just need attention. We talked about that one before. If you're feeling socially cut off, socially isolated, you might engage in behaviors that you're hopeful might get you that closeness that you're desiring. And sometimes children just want to get stuff that they like, and they just don't have a lot of ways for getting that. Maybe they want to ride the bike, or maybe they wanted to play with a particular toy. So these are just some other additional examples of why children might be engaging in particular kinds of challenging behaviors. And once we know the why, then we can figure out the how to fix it. That's why it's important to figure out what the function is, because the function tells us what we need to do to either promote positive behaviors or to reduce the number of challenging or mistaken behaviors that we're seeing. So once you've collected data and analyzed it and thought about what that data means, then it's time to create an intervention plan. So I'm not going to tell you about how to create a personal intervention plan, but I'm going to talk with you about some sources that can help you in thinking about how behavior intervention plans are created, agencies that are sort of devoted to this particular topic. So on the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about the CSEFL, or the Center on the Social and Emotional Foundations of Early Learning Pyramid model that you can use. And we're also going to talk about the Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Network that you can contact for assistance when you have children who are exhibiting challenging behaviors. So first, let's talk about the CSEFL pyramid model. So basically what this is a positive behavioral intervention and support, or a PBIS. So if you work in elementary schools, you've probably heard of PBIS. It's interventions and supports that are designed to help children exhibit more positive behaviors and to have better social and emotional skills. And it's kind of a very popular thing to talk about in that kind of K through 12 world. But the early childhood version of PBIS, or Positive Behavioral Intervention and Support, is the CSEFL pyramid model. And so it is a way of thinking about what kinds of intervention children might need, depending on what kinds of behaviors they're exhibiting. So it's important to know that For most kids, they're going to fall in this blue area of the pyramid to the left. So all children, because all children exhibit mistaken behaviors and need positive child guidance strategies to be used with them, all of them need environments that are high quality, that are supportive, that promote nurturing and responsive relationships. So all children need that. That's just 100% of children need that to get to the yellow at the bottom, which is to be a healthy, functioning, independent adult. Remember, we said that was the goal of positive child guidance. Now, some children might need more than the blue strategies can provide. So some children may need just more targeted intervention. They're exhibiting behaviors that are a little bit more challenging, a little bit more often, a little bit more pervasively, and they need you to do some observation and assessment and to think about what functions those behaviors are serving, and then try and come up with some in-class strategies that are a little bit different than you might use with the rest of the children to see if you can help those children to engage in more positive behaviors. But then sometimes there are children who, even with those extra supports in the classroom, those extra interventions, it just doesn't seem to be working. So they may need to go to different settings on and off throughout the day. They may need to have more specific folks come in and help them to navigate those kinds of behaviors. They may need more intervention than can either be provided by the classroom teacher, by him or herself, or more intervention that can be provided in the general education classroom setting. So we may do pull-out services, we might bring in other professionals to collaborate with who can help us in those endeavors. So that's what the pyramid model is all about. So there's also a really cool service that you can take advantage of. It's called the Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Network, or IECMHC. You can go on their website and check them out. But basically, if you're kind of uncertain what to do, or you need some consultation and thinking about what kinds of intervention strategies might be most effective with a particular child, they can come do evaluation for you. They can evaluate you in your classroom and take a look at the child, and then help you to think about some direct and indirect strategies that might be more effective than the ones that you're currently using. So I'd really encourage you to check out their website, and they have a video on that website that you can watch as well. So I just wanted to note that it's really important to employ positive child guidance and help children with mistaken behaviors, and particularly with those more challenging behaviors. Because if we don't, there can be outcomes that might not be the ones we're looking for developmentally. So you can see here that for those kids who continue to exhibit challenging behaviors down the line, that these are some of the developmental outcomes they might experience. And I think we can probably all agree that those are things that we don't want children to have to experience. And just a reminder, it's always easier to change things early in life. It takes less effort to intervene when children are young, and it's more effective than to wait until they're older. But do remember that when you are addressing challenging behavior with children, don't try and employ all your positive child guidance strategies when the child is really worked up and you're worked up and everybody's very dysregulated. You're not going to have very good success. So this little graph on this little picture on the right of the screen is showing you that the best time to intervene is when everybody's calm. So work on behaviors that need to be worked on when there's not a crisis. Because if it's in crisis mode and again everybody's dysregulated, it's going to be really hard to enact the things that you want to. So look for moments when things are calm that you can implement the intervention strategies that you develop related to SECEFL, and maybe if you're using that mental health network. But don't try and, nobody wants to be talked to about their behavior or to be fixed when they're losing it. we want to talk about those things when we're calm, and it's the same for children. And just a little summary for this lecture from your book. I thought this table was really helpful to kind of wrap it all back around and think about, like, what does it feel like to be in a caring community? What kinds of things should we be trying to achieve for children? So somebody who cares about you, feeling like you belong, feeling proud of yourself, having friends, being challenged but not more than you can handle, not being scared. So having that safety and that security and being treated like a person who has worth and value and has strengths and capabilities.